Imagine this. You're sitting in a trendy cafe in the middle of downtown, scrolling your phone, and you see a guy on TikTok, slicked back hair, crisp white shirt unbuttoned just enough, standing in front of a camera telling the world he's a chef, and he has 2 million followers. People ask for his autograph. People wait in line for 3 hours to eat what he cooks. People call him an artist. You nod along. Seems normal. Seems right. A great chef deserves respect, obviously. But if you said that sentence in 1750, people would look at you like you'd lost your mind. They would genuinely worry about you. Because for thousands of years of human history, cooking for other people and a surprising number of other jobs you now consider dream careers sat at the very bottom of the social ladder. Not low pay bottom, not unglamorous bottom. Bottom as in people didn't want to sit next to you. Bottom as in your children were forbidden from marrying into respectable families. Bottom as in your job title was, quite literally, used as an insult to someone's face. And here's the strangest part. The reversal didn't happen gradually over millennia the way you might assume. It happened so fast it would give you whiplash sometimes in just a single generation, and almost none of us noticed it happening. This video is about 8 jobs like that. 8 professions your ancestors would have been mortified, genuinely humiliated to see their descendants pursue, but that today sit on every single dream career list on the internet. The short answer is society shifts, values shift, money rewrites everything. The long answer, the one that's actually fascinating and a little uncomfortable, is what we're about to walk through. The kitchen thing. Let's start where we started with cooks. In ancient Rome, professional cooking was almost exclusively the work of slaves. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech, literally enslaved human beings. If you were a free Roman citizen and you cooked for a living, something had gone catastrophically wrong in your life. The kitchen was hot, dark, greasy, and low, physically underground in many Roman houses, tucked away where guests would never have to see it or smell it. The philosopher Seneca wrote with open, undisguised contempt about people who spent their lives inventing new dishes. He ranked them alongside the lowest forms of human labor, barely above animals performing tricks. In medieval Europe, the pattern held firm. The people preparing banquets for kings and lords were servants, sometimes serfs, sometimes literal property passed down with the estate like furniture. A cook was a tool. A useful tool. Sure, nobody wanted bad food, but a tool nonetheless. The idea that a cook could be famous, or wealthy, or celebrated by name, that sentence didn't parse. It was like saying your plow horse should be invited to the feast. Then the French Revolution happened in 1789, and this is where the story flips. The aristocrats fled the country or lost their heads, and suddenly hundreds of highly skilled private chefs were unemployed overnight. Those chefs did something radical. They opened restaurants for the public. Not taverns, not inns, restaurants with menus, with individual dishes, with the chef's name attached. Within a generation, figures like Marie-Antoine Carême were being called the king of chefs and the chef of kings. The job hadn't changed, not one bit. You still stood over fire for hours and made food, but the status had inverted completely. Today, a Michelin-starred chef is treated like a rock star. Gordon Ramsay's net worth sits north of $200 million. People weep on reality television when they're eliminated from cooking competitions. Let that satisfying absurdity sit with you. A profession built on slavery and servitude for over 2,000 years is now one of the most aspirational careers on earth. Same heat, same grease. Completely different story. The body thing. Here's one that might catch you off guard. Personal trainers, fitness coaches, athletes, anyone whose job is essentially moving their body for money. In the ancient world, gladiators in Rome were adored by crowds. Sure, women reportedly collected their sweat as a beauty product, which is a detail you can never unhear. But they were legally classified as infames, people without honor. They sat in the same legal and social category as prostitutes and convicted criminals. Being cheered by 50,000 people didn't lift you out of that classification. You were still, in the eyes of the law, disposable. In most feudal societies across Europe and Asia, people who performed physical feats for money, acrobats, wrestlers, strongmen at fairs, were vagrants, drifters, carnival folk. They traveled because no town wanted them to stay. The concept of a professional athlete as a respected member of society barely existed outside very narrow aristocratic contexts like the original Greek Olympics, where the competitors were wealthy amateurs competing for glory. The moment you did it for money, you were degraded. The shift began slowly in the 19th century, with organized sports in Britain, cricket clubs, football associations, boxing with proper rules, but it didn't fully crystallize until the 20th century when television turned athletes into household names and corporate sponsorship turned them into multimillionaires. Today, a top footballer earns more in a single week than a medieval lord collected from his entire estate in a year. A personal trainer with a decent Instagram following can build a six-figure business from their living room in their underwear. Your ancestors would not understand that sentence. Not even a little bit. They would think you were describing a fantasy, the stage thing. Actors, performers, the entire concept of entertainer as a legitimate, admirable career. For most of Western history, actors were considered morally suspect at best and outright sinful at worst. The Catholic Church officially excommunicated actors for centuries, not some actors, not bad actors, all actors. They were literally barred from receiving sacraments, barred from Christian burial. In Elizabethan England, the England of Shakespeare actors were legally classified as rogues and vagabonds unless they secured the personal patronage of a nobleman. Without that patronage, performing was a crime. You could be arrested for it. In Confucian-influenced East Asia, performers occupied the lowest rung of the social hierarchy, beneath farmers, beneath artisans, beneath merchants, and merchants were already considered borderline parasites. In Tokugawa-era Japan, kabuki actors belonged to a class so stigmatized that their descendants carried the social stain for generations. Your great-grandfather was an actor? People knew. People remembered. And they held it against you. Now think about Hollywood. Think about the Academy Awards. Think about the fact that a 23-year-old who pretends to be other people for a living can become one of the most famous and influential humans on the planet. Be invited to state dinners, speak at the United Nations, and have their personal opinion asked on climate policy by actual journalists. The job is the same fundamental act. Dress up, pretend, make people feel things. But the status is so different, it's almost unrecognizable as the same profession. The mechanism behind the reversal was simple and enormous at the same time. Mass media, radio, film, then television, collapsed the distance between performer and audience. When one actor can reach 100 million people simultaneously through a screen, scarcity economics kick in, and suddenly that actor is worth more than a factory, worth more than a lord, worth more than the bishop who once had the power to excommunicate them. That is not a small irony. That is a complete inversion of the moral universe. The merchant thing. This one is massive and almost always overlooked. For most of recorded history, in most civilizations, merchants, people who bought things and sold them at a higher price without actually making anything with their own hands, were considered parasites. Sometimes legally, sometimes spiritually, often both. In ancient China, the Confucian social hierarchy placed merchants dead last, scholars first, then farmers, then artisans, then merchants at the bottom. The logic was devastating in its clarity. A farmer grows the rice you eat, an artisan crafts the pot you cook in, but a merchant? A merchant just moves things around and skims the profit off the top. He produces nothing. He creates nothing. He simply takes. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church's prohibition against usury, the charging of interest on loans, meant that anyone involved in money lending or finance was flirting with eternal damnation. This was not a metaphor. Artists painted moneylenders sitting next to literal demons in hell. Dante placed usurers in the seventh circle of the Inferno, below murderers. Today, the merchant class doesn't just sit at the top of society. The merchant class is the top, the wealthiest human beings alive, the ones on the Forbes list, the ones who shape government policy, the ones whose names your children recognize before they can read, are merchants. They buy, they sell, they move capital across borders, they charge interest on everything. They are doing exactly what Confucius despised and exactly what the church called a mortal sin. And they are not just tolerated, they are celebrated, studied, envied, worshipped. Let that sit with you for a moment. The ink thing, tattoo artists, body modification practitioners, people who push pigment into skin for a living. In 19th century Europe and America, tattooing was almost exclusively associated with three groups: sailors, criminals, and colonized indigenous peoples. All three groups that respectable society actively looked down on. A tattooed person walking through Victorian London was either a convict recently released, a sideshow attraction being gawked at for money, or a returned sailor from the South Pacific with stories nobody at church wanted to hear. The tattoo artist, the person who performed the act, was even lower. They weren't a career. They were barely a person. In polite society's eyes, now walk into any major city on earth. Tattoo studios sit between boutique coffee shops and contemporary art galleries. And they look like art galleries themselves: white walls, curated portfolios, ambient music. A top tattoo artist has a 6-month waiting list, charges thousands per session, and selects clients the way a gallery selects collectors. Their Instagram feeds are curated like museum exhibitions. The word artist is not ironic there. It is completely literal and it is earned. The reversal took less than 50 years, from criminal marking to high culture art form in half a century. That is extraordinarily fast for a cultural shift that deep. The words thing. Writers. Specifically, people who write fiction, poetry, or stories for money. This one twists depending on which society and which century you examine, but the broad pattern holds. In many historical periods, writing imaginative stories for public consumption was considered disreputable, morally dangerous, or simply beneath serious people. In ancient Rome, poets survived only through wealthy patrons because writing for the open marketplace was vulgar. It meant you were begging the public for approval, and that was humiliating. In much of post-medieval Europe, novelists, particularly early novelists, were accused of peddling lies, corrupting youth, and weakening moral fiber. The novel itself was considered a dangerous, low, even shameful form of entertainment well into the 18th century. Novels written by women were especially suspect, which is why so many early female authors used male pen names not just for marketing, but for survival. Today, a best-selling author is a celebrity. A successful screenwriter can earn millions per project. The entire global entertainment industry, worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually, rests fundamentally on the labor of people who sit alone in rooms and make things up. Storytelling hasn't changed. Humans have told stories since the campfire. But the economics around storytelling changed, and the status followed the money like a dog follows a scent, every single time. The beauty thing: barbers, hairdressers, makeup artists, people who work on other people's appearances for a living. In medieval and early modern Europe, barbers were lumped together with surgeons, which sounds prestigious until you understand that surgeons at the time were absolutely not prestigious. They were manual laborers who happened to work with flesh instead of wood. The gentleman physician studied theory and read Latin texts. The surgeon got his hands dirty, and so did the barber. Barbers pulled teeth, drained infected blood, lanced boils, stitched wounds, and cut hair, sometimes all in the same visit, sometimes with disturbingly similar tools. The barber surgeon was a rough tradesman, barely above a butcher in social estimation. Makeup artists and hairdressers fared even worse in certain eras. In Puritan England and colonial America, cosmetics were directly associated with vanity, deception, and sexual looseness. A woman who wore visible makeup was morally suspect. The person who applied it for money? Beneath serious discussion. Fast forward to now. A celebrity hairstylist can command thousands per session and be featured in magazines alongside the stars whose hair they cut. Makeup artists with YouTube channels have built multi-million-dollar beauty empires from their bedrooms. The global beauty industry is worth over $500 billion. And the people who do the actual hands-on work, the ones who touch faces and shape hair with their fingers, are treated with a reverence and a creative respect that a 17th century barber surgeon yanking teeth with rusty pliers could never, in his wildest fever dreams, have imagined. The picture thing. And finally, photographers, filmmakers, visual content creators, anyone who captures images for a living. This is the newest reversal on the list, and in some ways the most dramatic, because it happened within living memory. Photography was invented in the 1830s, and for most of its first century it was treated as a mechanical trade, not an art form. Painters dismissed photographers with an almost physical disgust. "You just push a button," was the standard line. The photographer was a technician, a machine operator, a recorder of brute facts, not a creator of meaning or beauty. Hiring a photographer was like hiring a plumber. Useful, yes. Admirable, no. Film inherited the same stigma for decades. Early cinema was cheap, lowbrow entertainment for working class audiences who couldn't afford theater tickets. The people who made films were carnival showmen, vaudeville refugees, immigrant entrepreneurs who'd been shut out of every respectable East Coast industry. Hollywood itself was literally built by outsiders who went west because the establishment wouldn't let them in. And now, a photographer is an artist, a filmmaker is a visionary. A 20-year-old content creator with a camera and a good eye can build a global audience of millions and earn a livelihood that outstrips doctors, lawyers, and engineers, the professions their parents begged them to pursue. The tool hasn't fundamentally changed. You point a device at something and capture light. But the person holding that device went from invisible tradesman to respected artist to cultural icon in less than 200 years. So here's the question that should, if you've been paying attention, be buzzing in the back of your skull right now. What actually changed? Not the work itself. A chef still stands over heat for 12 hours until their back aches. An actor still pretends to be someone they're not. A merchant still buys low and sells high. A tattoo artist still pushes ink under skin with a needle. The physical labor is the same. The act is identical. So why does the exact same job sit at the bottom of one century and the very top of another? Three forces. And it's the same three forces every single time. First, technology that creates scale. When mass media first print, then radio, then film, then television, then the internet allowed one person's work to reach millions of people simultaneously, the economics of individual talent exploded. A chef cooking for one wealthy household is a servant. That same chef cooking on camera for 20 million viewers is a brand, a business, a cultural figure. The work hasn't changed by a single calorie. The audience changed. Second, the slow decoupling of making physical things from creating value. For most of human history, societies respected people who produced tangible objects you could see and touch. Farmers, blacksmiths, builders, weavers. If you didn't make something physical, you were automatically suspicious. But modern economies run on services, on experiences, on attention, on stories. The merchant, the performer, the photographer, the content creator, they produce nothing you can hold in your hand. Yet they generate enormous, measurable economic value. Once societies accepted that shift, the old hierarchies crumbled almost overnight. Third, and this is the one nobody talks about, the slow, irreversible death of inherited status. In a world where your social position was locked at birth by blood, land, and noble title, the only way to be high status was to be born into it. Doing a job, any job, was inherently beneath the aristocracy. Work itself was low. But when inherited aristocracy weakened through revolutions, through democracy, through the brutal leveling force of capitalism, status became something you could earn. And the moment that happened, any job that generated visible wealth and public admiration became a legitimate route to the top. That's it. Scale, value redefinition, and the death of birthright. Those three forces took 8 despised, stigmatized, sometimes criminalized professions and turned them into 8 objects of universal envy. And they did it in what, by the standards of human history, was barely the blink of an eye. Now, here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Just a little bit. If it happened to these 8 professions, it is almost certainly happening right now to jobs we currently look down on. There are occupations today, jobs that make you wince slightly when someone mentions them at a dinner party that your grandchildren will consider glamorous, aspirational, maybe even noble. You just can't see which ones yet. Nobody standing in a palace kitchen in 1780 saw the chef revolution coming. Nobody watching a traveling actor troupe get chased out of a village in 1650 saw the Hollywood century coming. Nobody watching a sailor get tattooed in a port town in 1910 saw the fine art tattoo studio coming. The pattern is clear. The pattern is relentless. And it is almost certainly already moving beneath your feet right now, reshaping something you haven't thought to look at yet. So, I'll leave you with this. What job today do people look down on quietly, politely, but unmistakably that you think will be a dream career in 50 years? Drop it in the comments. Because if history is any guide, somebody watching this right now will be exactly right, and the rest of us will spend the next half century catching up. I'll see you in the next one.